Well, I'd say that there was probably a lot of eye rolling and thinking that, well, this will last about 6 months.
Hello readers, I'm Victoria Wood and you're listening to Biblio Happy Hour, the show that shares new book releases, we chat to the authors who write them, and the people who sell them. Every week, we'll share some of the new books that will be hitting bookshelves that week. We'll invite an author or two or more on the show to talk about their debut or newest release, and we'll introduce you to an independent bookseller and their bookstore so you can stop by, get tailored book recommendations, and pick up some new books when you're in town. So make space on your bookshelves, follow us on social media, and make sure you're subscribed to Biblio Happy Hour wherever you listen to your favorite shows. Readers, Biblio Lifestyle is a newsletter, community, and space for people who can't live a life without books in it. Every Friday, you'll get a special treat in your inbox filled with inspirational content, book recommendations, self-care tips, original interviews, and things we think you'll enjoy. The best part? You'll only receive one email per week, and it will be an amazing 5-minute read or less. So if you're not on the list, sign up now for our free weekly delivery at bibliolifestyle.com. I've included a link in the show notes so you can sign up there. This week, I'll be chatting with bookseller Colin Brown from the Bookshop in Lakewood, located in Lakewood, Ohio. We talk about his bookshop, the town of Lakewood, and how he got involved in bookselling and started his bookstore. Colin, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to Biblio Happy Hour.
Oh, it's very nice to be here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good, so happy to have you on the show. So, really quick, before we get started, are you a coffee or a tea person?
I probably fall a little bit more into the cheap off-brand energy drink category, frankly. I do make coffee for people, but I don't know if that exactly counts. I do tend to have to run it around to neighbors to make sure it's good before I put it out.
Sounds good. Alrighty, so tell us about your bookstore, where you're located, and then also share a bit about your town.
Well, the store is, it's mostly a used bookstore. I'm located in Lakewood, Ohio, which is a small walking community. It shares a border with Cleveland. Okay. It's actually has the highest population density of any city between New York and Chicago. Lakewood has a lot of small businesses on the Madison corridor, locally owned shops. You have a lot of variety. There's Fierce Confections is a local chocolate shop. They're just down the block from me here. You have a lot of little artisan places throughout. Madison is also known for having pretty high number of bars comparatively. So it has a pretty active nightlife, I'd say, comparatively. Cleveland, all kinds of things to do downtown these days. I frankly don't get to go down there because I'm always in the shop, but it's undergone a huge renovation over the last couple of years.
How far are you outside of Cleveland? How far is Lakewood?
Oh, it shares a border with it. So from downtown, you're probably looking at maybe 15 minutes by highway. Okay. And that's if traffic is bad.
Right. Okay. So tell us, when did you first open your bookstore?
I opened in October 2014. Okay.
Was this something you planned on doing your entire life? Did you know you were always going to open a bookstore, or did you just happen upon the bookstore business? Did you just fall into it?
No, I definitely fall into the category of people who kind of fell into book sales more than anything else. Okay. I read a ton, and I'd had a theatrical background, so in the early days when I was trying to make a go of that, I usually was supplementing my income by working retail and in various bookstores around. And as it became more apparent that theater was not going to be a successful route for me, I spent more and more times in bookstores, and I really enjoyed retail, if not necessarily the conditions of working for other people.
Right.
kind of came from that side of things. And I've slowly grown the store from basically my book collection.
Okay.
I harvested about 75% of it to come up with opening stock there that first summer. Took a small loan from my sister and started with there, and have pretty much been putting everything back into the store in order to grow it since then.
Oh, wow. That sounds really amazing. On that note, what kind of reaction did you get from your friends and your family when you decided that you wanted to open a bookstore?
Well, I'd say that there was probably a lot of eye rolling and thinking that, well, this will last about 6 months. I mean, you have to remember it was when I was really talking about it in the beginning. I started talking about it in maybe 2012, 2013.
Right.
And, the economy and the state of bookstores was what it was. It was still very much a dwindling field. I mean, even just that little far back ago.
Yeah.
So everyone thought that I was going to go belly up pretty much right away. But I've managed to keep things going and slowly build. I've just completed my second move, this time to get a larger space. So I hope to start doing small events, book clubs, author signings, and the like out of the space soon.
Okay, that sounds really good. And lastly, wrapping things up, what would you like everyone listening to know about the Bookshop in Lakewood? What would you just want everyone listening to know about your bookstore?
Well, if you come into the Bookshop in Lakewood, you're going to find something on your subject. I have all subject matters pretty much covered. I'm as general use as it's possible to be. Over the next couple months, we should start having small author gatherings and book clubs during the week. So there will be some activities. There might be a little bit of live music here and there. So if you were to come on in, you'd find definitely something in your subject area. I hope to start doing some new book sales within a couple of months and get my special ordering back online.
That sounds great. And Colin, thank you so much for taking time out and coming on the show. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having the show in the first place and inviting me on.
Absolutely. Readers, you can connect with the Bookshop in Lakewood, Ohio, over on Facebook at the Bookshop in Lakewood. If you'd like to tune in to the rest of my conversation with bookseller Colin Brown, you can tune in to the full podcast episode over on our Patreon page. That's patreon.com/bibliofinder. To find an independent bookstore near you or when you're traveling, visit bibliofinder.com. Bibliofinder is a new online directory for independent bookstores. They help users to find bookstores worldwide based on their current or planned location. If you're on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, please tag Bibliofinder in your Indy bookstore photos. Before I get started with this week's new releases, I'd like to highlight 2 literary events happening this week as well. On January 18th, the author of Winnie the Pooh, A.A. Milner, was born in 1882. Another literary birthday, on January 19th, the author Edgar Allan Poe was born in 1809. Now, I will be mentioning some of the books that will be available on bookshelves during the week of Monday, January 13th. And I'm thrilled to have authors Ani Katz, Julia Kelly, Vikram Paralkar, and Nicolette Polek on the show to talk about their new releases. New this week from Penguin Press is Imperfect Union by Steve Inskeep. Inskeep tells the riveting story of John and Jessie Fremont, the husband and wife team who in the 1800s were instrumental in the westward expansion of the United States and thus became America's first great political couple. New in paperback from Dutton Books, The Woman Inside by E.G. Scott. Now in paperback, the impossible to put down domestic thriller about secrets and revenge is told from the perspectives of a husband and wife who are the most perfect and the most dangerous match for each other. New this week from Penguin Books is a new psychological suspense thriller entitled A Good Man. And we have the author Ani Katz here with us to share all the details. Ani, welcome to Biblio Happy Hour.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, absolutely. We're super excited to have you here. So, your debut, A Good Man, hits bookshelves this week. How are you feeling?
I'm so excited. It's really wonderful to share this work with the world. I'm just so thrilled that it's going to be out there and find an audience.
Absolutely. I can just imagine just how exciting this time will be and how real it will feel once you actually see the book in bookstores.
Yes, that's going to be a real trip, absolutely, to see it there on the shelves.
But tell us about your novel. Tell us about A Good Man and what can readers expect?
So, readers can expect a psychological thriller that's really an exploration of how one family is destroyed by toxic masculinity. And the entire book is told from the point of view of Thomas Martin. He's the narrator, and he is telling this story, and he's really presenting himself as sort of a devoted husband and father, very successful. He's built this wonderful life for himself, but at the same time, he's really grappling with how to be the man that he is really expecting himself to be, how he is able to hold himself up to what are frankly impossible standards. And in grappling with this, he ultimately commits these terrible acts, which I won't get into, but he is really wrestling with whether or not he is a good man. Is he a victim? Is he a monster? That's what to expect.
Right. So what inspired you to write this story? Give us some details behind the scenes.
So the very first inspiration came from an event that had happened in the extended family of a close friend. And I had thought about this story and thought about including it in a longer novel about a multi-generational family. But then I thought what I was really most interested in was the mindset of someone who could do something so seemingly unthinkable to their family and what it would be like to be inside that kind of mindset. I was also sort of frustrated with what I was seeing in a lot of contemporary literature where something really shocking and terrible happens, but the reader gets to experience it from an outside observer, someone who's more like a stand-in for the reader, able to experience it at a safe distance, and then it just becomes more of a sort of titillation, violence for violence's sake. And I was really interested in writing a story that would implicate the reader and make them feel like they had been with the narrator the whole time and had not turned away from what they were hearing.
Right. Okay. Who would you say is your favorite character in the novel?
My favorite character in the novel? That's a really interesting question. It depends on what you mean by favorite.
Or let me put it this way.
Sure.
The character you relate with the most or you are most empathetic towards, or who you enjoyed writing. How about that one?
I would say that the characters who resonate with me the most are Thomas's twin sisters, who we first meet when they're very young women, and they're existing in this kind of arrested state where they're sort of stunted by the traumas they've experienced as children. And they're very odd, they're very strange, but as we follow them through the course of the novel, they prove to be very loving and actually, I think, the real source of goodness in the story,
Right.
if there is any. And so for that reason, I think that I'm most fond of them and they resonate for me the most, which is not to say that a novel needs to have sympathetic characters to resonate, but I would say that they are my favorite characters.
Right. Okay. Getting into the process of, you writing this novel and everything just coming together, how long did it take to write this novel, A Good Man?
I would say altogether it took about a year. I was working as a private tutor at the time, and I was about to go back to graduate school for teaching. And I decided to take 3 months off before I started my graduate program just to write and really try to get this novel done because I knew I was going to have less time once I was back in school. So I took those 3 months and wrote, I would say, about the first 2/3 of the novel, then did my first semester, and the following summer I finished the first draft. So all told, it was almost a year.
Okay. So getting into your reading life, what was the last book you finished reading that you highly recommend?
So one book I read recently, which it was one of those experiences where you just sit down and start reading, and before you know it, you've finished the book, was In the Dream House by Carmen Machado. And I was just so taken with both the subject matter, the voice, the prose. It's a memoir of domestic violence and abuse, and it really reads like the most incredible kind of magical realist thriller. And she does all sorts of amazing formal things. And as a writer, it is really inspiring to read. So that's one. And another writer that I've discovered, and I'm working my way through some of her books, is Nell Zink. And I read her novel Mislaid, and I am in the process of reading her novel The Wall Creeper. And she's just a very sharp writer. The stories are sort of devastating and also really hilarious. So she's a new favorite of mine.
Oh, awesome. So if you didn't write, what would you do for work or as a creative pursuit?
So in addition to writing, I also work full-time as a teacher. This year I'm teaching 3rd grade, and it's been a really great job for me because it is related to reading and writing, but at the same time I'm not producing writing for someone else's purposes. I'm able to really share a love of literature and engage in the writing process with children. So I find that it really sort of reinvigorates me and makes me excited to do my own work. So it's really the perfect day job for me to have.
Awesome. So when you're not reading or writing, what are you doing?
I spend a lot of time walking my dogs. I really like to cook, and I spend time with my family who all live in the New York area, spend time with friends. I would say that a lot of time is spent reading and writing, or teaching or doing homework for graduate school, so there isn't that much free time these days, but
Right.
I live in Brooklyn, which I love, and it's a good life.
Yeah, absolutely. So we love indie bookstores over here, and we're always looking for, any opportunity to shout out our indie bookstores and indie booksellers. What are some of your favorite indie bookstores?
Some of my favorite indie bookstores here in New York, I love Book Culture. I would say that I buy most of my books there since they have a branch near my school. Greenlight Books in Brooklyn is also wonderful. I lived in Chicago for 3 years, and in that city, the Pilsen Community Bookstore is really great. And I also have to shout out Powerhouse Arena in Dumbo, Brooklyn, which is having my book launch on January 14th.
Oh, awesome. So getting back to A Good Man, how do you want readers to feel after reading this book? What are you hoping for?
I think what I most want, besides for them to sort of be consumed by reading the story, at the end I really want to implicate them and make them feel uncomfortable. I want the story to stay with them, and I want it to prompt them to think about the ways that they are maybe complicit in their consumption of these kinds of stories, and maybe the ways that they are complicit in perpetuating certain gender norms and standards. So I want it to be an enjoyable read, but I also want it to be a read that stays with you and makes you think.
Absolutely. Ani, thank you so much for coming on the show. Everyone, A Good Man will be available in bookstores on Tuesday, January 14th.
Thank you so much.
Readers, you can connect with author Ani Katz at her website, anikatz.com. And you can also find her on Twitter at AniBKatz. You can also tune in to the rest of my chat with author Ani Katz in our off-the-cuff discussion over on our Patreon page. She shares more about her work schedule, her writing process, and other projects she's currently working on. So head on over to patreon.com/bibliofinder and tune in to the rest of our conversation. New this week from Del Rey Books, The Vanished Birds by Simon Jimenez. In this novel, a mysterious child lands in the care of a solitary woman, changing both of their lives forever in this captivating debut of connection across space and time. New this week from Amistad Books, Hitting a Straight Lick with a Crooked Stick by Zora Neale Hurston. This is a collection of remarkable stories, including 8 lost Harlem Renaissance tales, now available to a wide audience for the first time. New this week from Avon Books, Love Her or Lose Her by Tessa Bailey. Bailey returns with a unique, sexy romantic comedy about a young married couple whose rocky relationship needs a serious renovation. New this week from Custom House, Little Gods by Meng Jing. Little Gods has been described as a lyrical and thought-provoking debut novel that explores the complex web of grief, memory, time, physics, history, and selfhood in the immigrant experience and the complicated bond between daughters and mothers. New in paperback from Eco Books, What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Blacker, a memoir in essays by Damon Young. New this week from Graydon House is Followers by Megan Angelo. This has been described as an electrifying story of 2 ambitious friends, the dark choices they make, and a profound moment that changes the meaning of privacy forever. New this week from Harper Books, Fabulous, a story collection by Lucy Hughes Hallett. New this week from Harper Via, The End of the Ocean by Maha Lundi, translated by Diane Oatley. New this week from William Morrow Books is All the Ways We Said Goodbye by Beatrice Williams, Lauren Willig, and Karen White. New in paperback from William Morrow Paperbacks, The Last Romantics by Tara Conklin. Also new in paperback, Cross Her Heart by Sarah Pinborough. Also new from William Morrow Paperbacks, The Mysterious Affair at Styles by Agatha Christie. Also new from William Morrow Paperbacks, St. Francis Society for Wayward Pets by Annie England Noblin. New this week from HQ Books is Roaring Girls by Holly Kite. Roaring Girls tells fresh, engaging, and amazing tales of perseverance, grit, and radical success by pairing well-researched and riveting biographies with powerful and expressive drawings. This book features an array of diverse figures from the 1500s to 1900s. New this week from Gallery Books is The Whispers of War, and we have the author Julia Kelly here with us to share all the details. Julia, welcome to Biblio Happy Hour.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, absolutely. We're very excited to have you here. So I know this is far from your first rodeo. You've put books out before, but The Whispers of War will be available on bookshelves this week. How are you feeling? How excited are you?
I'm very excited to have this book out in the world. It's always a nice experience getting to have something that you've worked on for so long get into the hands of readers and see what comes back to you, and hopefully it's good. But whatever it is, it's always so interesting to see what people pick up on, things that you as an author didn't make connections about. I love the whole process, so I find it really exciting.
Absolutely. So tell us about your novel. Tell us about The Whispers of War. What can readers expect?
Sure. So this is a book set in World War II Britain. It's actually set right on the eve of war. So it picks up in August 1939, and we meet three friends who've been friends since school. One is Marie, who's an expat, a German girl who's been living in London for years. And then her friends Nora, who works for the Home Office, and also her friend Hazel. And Hazel is a matchmaker. Actually, it's Hazel's character is based on an actual set of matchmakers in London at the time. So that's been kind of exciting to research. But basically the story goes from, these three friends who are all kind of young women trying to find their way in London. And then suddenly war hits. And obviously that changes life for a lot of different people. And it really changes life for Marie. Because she's German, she's immediately labeled an enemy alien and is required to go through a tribunal hearing. And basically what happened was the British government sorted people who were of German and Austrian descent. They sorted them into internment camps if they felt that they were a threat. And so Marie has to go through the process of trying to make sure that she stays free. As the war ramps up and things become more and more tense in Britain, these women all realize that they're going to have to fight to make sure that Marie stays out of internment. And it really tests their loyalty and how far they're willing to go in defiance of their country for their friendship.
Absolutely. So what inspired you to write this story? Give us some behind the scenes details. I know historical novels are your thing, but why this story? Why this one?
Well, I grew up in Los Angeles, which seems a world away from London and from Britain that I write about, although I do live here now. And I actually grew up very close to Santa Anita racetrack, which had been used for internment of Japanese people in the United States during World War II. And so I had sort of almost felt like I grew up with the story of this really, terrible, inhumane thing happening to people in my home country. And then I moved here and began to learn through the research that I was doing for various books, more and more about what happened here in Britain and the number of people who were affected, the number of people who were interned, and what it really did to their lives and that loss of freedom. And so I felt like this was really a story that I wanted to tell and share that story with people and also discover more of myself. And I love writing about female friendships. So getting the chance to really kind of sink my teeth into something where three women all had their own lives and all had things that were going on outside of this friendship, but that focus was really on what happens when they're put under pressure was particularly interesting to me.
Right, absolutely. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little. I hope. Who would you say is your favorite character in the novel? I know there are three women, they're wonderful, but who would you pick? And if not them, any other character, who's your favorite?
I go back and forth a lot. When I was first writing the book, Marie was my favorite. She was the easiest to write. So when you're writing a book, that's always great. But I love all of them for different reasons, but I think the character that really emerged as kind of having a really full, really interesting life to me was actually Hazel, so the matchmaker. I won't spoil anything about the book, but Hazel is going through her own difficulties in her marriage and in her personal life, and it informs a lot of the decisions that she makes. And I think she makes some very courageous decisions throughout the book. And really, the process of writing that character and kind of going back and digging in deeper, it was one of the most difficult character studies I've had to do, but one that I found the most rewarding in the end, because I think I hope readers will find that she comes out of this book a really fully fledged person, and I hope people will have a lot of sympathy for her.
Right, absolutely. So when you're not reading or writing, what are you doing?
I cook a lot. I love cooking, and not a big surprise. I really, at this point, am really still enjoying exploring London a lot. And
Yes.
one of the ways I do that actually is I'm a runner. So I'm lucky enough to be able to run to the Thames and run along the water, along those paths,
Hmm.
and kind of explore London. And one of my favorite things about that is, I live in a converted Victorian house. I live near places that were unfortunately bombed, but redeveloped and rebuilt. And so you kind of have a way of stumbling across history when you're just out on your day to day. And I find that to be great for research, but also just for my personal interest as well. This is an incredibly beautiful city, and I feel very lucky to be able to live here.
Absolutely. So, what would you say is your favorite childhood book that you can remember?
Oh my goodness, you're going to make me choose.
Okay, you can tell us a few.
That's a cruel question.
I know.
Favorite childhood book. Well, it's tough to choose one. I was a big fan of Little Women when I was growing up, and this is more of a sort of transition into adolescence book. But I love I Capture the Castle by Dottie Smith. I think that book is just wonderful. It's got a heroine at the center of it who is aspiring to be a writer, and so she's sort of recording her family's life. They live in this very bohemian, sort of falling apart castle, and meet a family, the wealthy family that's moved into the house and basically in their village, and it sort of sets off this string of events. And I think it's this beautifully nostalgic book and a real coming of age book. And I read it at a period of time in my life where I was close enough in age to the heroine that I identified very strongly with that. So maybe a little bit later on the timeline than a children's book, but it is a favorite.
Okay, absolutely. Sticking to reading, what was the last book that you finished reading that you would absolutely recommend?
Well, this is always a tough one because I do tend to read a lot when I'm writing. I don't necessarily read strictly World War II fiction. In fact, I do sometimes when I'm in the drafting stage try to avoid some of that just so I don't pull too many ideas out of somebody else's book. But I did just read two things actually. One is not out yet, but it will be out when I think this airs, called Love Lettering by Kate Claiborne, and that's a beautiful kind of modern love story set in New York where I used to live. So I have a lot of affection for books that really look and feel like the New York that I knew. And then I also just read The New Confessions by William Boyd. It's one of his older books, but I'm a big fan of his historical fiction. And he has a way of telling these incredibly intricate stories that sometimes can just feel so effortless. And I really would love to one day sit him down and ask him about, his process of research and various things, because the detail is just so rich in these books. This one goes from sort of pre-World War I, World War I, and then gets into sort of Berlin in the 1920s, and then Hollywood in the just after the silent era, so it's sort of in the 1930s, and it's just fascinating. So both were books that I really enjoyed, both very different books.
Right, absolutely. So part of this podcast is all about indie bookstores and indie booksellers, and we're always looking for opportunities to shout them out. So please share with us some of your favorite indie bookstores.
Well, I'll give you one from my childhood and one from my 20s, my sort of formative 20s in New York. So the childhood one is Vroman's in Pasadena, which I still think is sort of a magical, wonderful place. And I remember it was just such a treat to get to go there. And we would all spread out across the bookstore, my family. And, I remember all the handwritten signs that they used to do. I'm sure they still do. But the book selection was just wonderful. The people were wonderful. And it just felt like kind of it's a cliche, but a bit of a palace of reading. And so I do love it. And I do very much want to go back the next time I'm in Los Angeles. And then the other is the Strand. The Strand bookstore in New York is an old institution, a standby. Yes. And I have spent many, many days and many hours wandering around the Strand, specifically in the fashion section, because they had some really wonderful books about fashion history that when I was writing Victorian set historical romances turned out to be really useful. You know, fantastic visual guides of what the clothes were like, and I really love fashion history, so it was absolutely perfect for me. So both of those I have a lot of affection for.
Absolutely. So before we get back to The Whispers of War, I'm gonna nosy into your business a bit and ask, are you working on anything else right now? Any new novels? What can you tell us?
I was just drawing a family tree for the book that I'm working on right now when you called me. So yes, I am. I'm working on another historical novel.
Yes.
It is across a few different timelines. So there is a World War II connection, but there's also, I don't know how much I can say at this point, but there is an earlier timeline and a later timeline as well. But the bulk of the book does happen around World War II. And what I can say is that there is a historic house, and more importantly for this book, a historic garden at the center of it. And that garden is what connects the story through the different timelines and how that unfolds. So I'm having a fantastic time visiting a whole bunch of old houses and gardens, and then also having a great time looking at really pretty pictures of flowers and dreaming and designing my garden. Since I don't have a garden here in London, I have a fantasy garden that I get to build in my sketchbook for my research.
Okay. Oh, I can't wipe the smile off my face. I'm super excited.
Good.
I love books. So I will definitely want to have you back on the show whenever that book is ready to come out in the world.
I'm there.
All right. So getting back to The Whispers of War, how do you want readers to feel after reading this book? What reactions are you hoping for?
Well, a few things. I always hope that readers come out of a book with that sort of good book feeling, like they just read something they really enjoyed and they want to go tell somebody about it. So that's always a really satisfying thing. But one of the things that I talked about in my author's note was that while I was writing this book, there was a lot of news coverage going on about the children being held at the border in the United States. And obviously being here in London, it does feel a little bit removed, but you can't not pay attention when they're talking about separation of families. And so while I'm not a terribly politically vocal author, I think partially because when I was a journalist, you weren't allowed to be, and it's hard to shake that instinct. I do hope that people make the connection between how we treated people in Britain and the United States during World War II who were different, who were born in a different country, and had done nothing wrong, were completely innocent, but were put away in camps, and how we're now treating people who are at the border and separating families. And my hope is that people come away with this. If you can empathize with characters in a historical fiction book, my hope is that you can empathize with people who are in the real world as well. So hopefully some of those things will come out when people read the book.
Awesome. Julia, thank you so much for coming on the show, everyone. The Whispers of War will be available in bookstores on Tuesday, January 14th.
Thank you so much.
Readers, you can connect with author Julia Kelly at her website, juliakellywrites.com. And you'll also be able to connect with her on social media via the links on her website to her Facebook page, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and Goodreads. You can also tune in to the rest of my conversation with Julia Kelly in our off-the-cuff discussion over on our Patreon page. She shares more about her research process, her work schedule, how being an author differs from being a journalist, and how publishing her first books changed her process of writing. So head on over to patreon.com/bibliofinder and tune in to the rest of our conversation. New this week from Gallery Scout Press, The Tenant by Katrine Engberg. New this week from Little Brown and Company, Lost by James Patterson. In this novel, Detective Tom Moon and his multi-talented team face off against an international crime ring looking to seize control of America's most vibrant city, Miami. Also new from Little Brown and Company, Kingdom Tide by Ry Curtis. New in paperback from Mulholland Books, Golden State by Ben Winters. New this week from Hachette Books is Race of Aces, World War II's elite airmen and the epic battle to become the master of the sky by John R. Bruning. New this week from Catapult Books is Night Theatre, and we have the author Vikram Paralkar here with us to share all the details. Vikram, welcome to Biblio Happy Hour.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, we're so excited to have you. So your novel, Night Theatre, will be available on bookshelves this week. How excited are you and how are you feeling?
I'm incredibly excited. You write a book and it takes such a long time to get it through the editing process, the publishing process, and then finally out into the hands of readers. And I'm really, really delighted that that's happening.
Absolutely. So tell us about your novel, Night Theatre, and what can readers expect?
So I suppose the best way to describe Night Theatre would be as a mix of Kafka and magic realism in a medical clinic in rural India. And so the premise of the book is set in a small clinic in a village where a doctor is working in really deprived circumstances, able to give nothing more than the most minimal care to the villagers who are under his medical care. And one night, after a particularly trying day, he's visited by a young family, a husband and wife, and their 8-year-old son, who reveal to him that they have been murdered, and they need him to stitch up their wounds so they can return to life at dawn. And so the entire book takes place over the course of one night and the morning that follows, when the doctor has to orient himself to this absolutely impossible situation in which he's placed, and yet try to find humanity and save the lives of these characters.
What inspired you to write Night Theatre? Give us some behind-the-scenes details.
So when I started writing this, there were several questions that were floating in my mind. So I'm actually, my day job, so to speak, is as a physician scientist. So I'm a leukemia doctor, and I also have a research lab where I perform medical research into leukemia. And because any diagnosis of cancer makes patients confront their mortality, the way in which people think about death, the way consequently about life, has always something that's in my mind. And in the midst of this were also these ideas of how does a moral person function within a corrupt system. Having grown up in India, a certain level of public corruption is endemic, and I've had to observe its consequences on the medical system there as well. And so in my mind, I was trying to fuse those two together, trying to have a doctor who was facing an impossible medical challenge in a setting where he also is grappling with ideas of morality, about corruption, and what the right action would be in a situation that leaves very few reasonable choices.
Okay, so beginning, middle, or end. What was the part that you enjoyed writing the most?
The idea for this book came to me almost in a flash. So in a flash, I had about 2/3 of the plot that just came to my mind over a course of 2 days. And then I sat down for another week and came up with a plot outline. And that was one of the most enjoyable experiences of well, that was the beginning of the process. It was also very enjoyable because it was really wonderful to have the pieces of a puzzle just fall together. And then I spent actually about a year and a half writing the entire book and fleshing out every single detail and putting the chapters together and then shaping the ending. So I would say perhaps the intense period of the jigsaw pieces of the story falling together was the most enjoyable part for me.
Okay, so I know you have a day job, but if you didn't write, what would you do for work or as a creative pursuit?
I would love to have been a musician or have some kind of career connected with music, either as a composer or a musician or a music critic even. There's just something about music that's deeply moving to me. And in a way, my interest in literature is also connected to my interest in music, in that there's something about the rhythm of words, about the way sentences are created, the music of language that's important to me. But if I weren't writing, I would probably put those creative energies in music.
Okay. So what would you say is your favorite childhood book?
So it would have to be the works of P.G. Wodehouse. So I grew up in Mumbai, and P.G. Wodehouse's books of Wooster and Jeeves were extremely popular, and I used to devour them as a young teenager. So I would say those are my favorite books.
Okay.
As a teenager.
All right. So what was the last book that you finished reading that you would now recommend?
The last novel that I finished reading is actually Lanny by Max Porter. So I was at the Edinburgh Literary Festival for my book last year, and I had a chance to listen to Max Porter talk live about his work. And it really made me very interested to pull out his book. And it's extraordinary. I would strongly recommend it to anyone who hasn't had a chance to take a look at it yet.
Absolutely. So on the podcast, we are big fans of indie bookstores and indie booksellers. So please share with our listeners some of your favorite indie bookstores.
So indie bookstores have been really important to me ever since my childhood, because while I was growing up in Mumbai, there were a number of commercial bookstores which had been taken over with a lot of fluff, and there was very little exposure to language and literature in most of the bookstores in India, except there was one bookstore called Lotus House Books, which was full of classic literature, new literature. It would have all of the works of Margaret Atwood and Jorge Luis Borges. And so that bookstore was so important to me as a kid growing up in India. And now in Philadelphia, the bookstore that I go to all the time is called Penn Book Center. So it's an indie bookstore that's located near the University of Pennsylvania campus. It's actually also an event space for a lot of lit events. So invited speakers or visiting authors give talks at the bookstore and do book readings. So it's become a central hub for the lit community here in Philadelphia. That's a store that's really important to me now.
Right, absolutely. Getting back to your book, The Night Theatre, how do you want readers to feel after reading this book?
I want readers to feel moved, engaged. I want them to feel as though they've had a glimpse into a different world. And I want them to feel as though the way of thinking about human beings and our relationships with each other has been changed.
All right. Vikram, thank you so much for coming on the show. Night Theatre will be available in bookstores on Tuesday, January 14th.
Thank you so much. Really glad to talk to you.
Readers, you can connect with author Vikram Paralkar at his website vikramparalkar.com. And you'll also find links on his website to connect with him on social media on his Facebook account, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also tune in to the rest of my chat with Vikram Paralkar in our off-the-cuff discussion over on our Patreon page. We talk more about his writing process and his schedule, as well as the second novel he's currently working on. So head on over to patreon.com/bibliofinder and tune in to the rest of our conversation. New this week from Counterpoint Press, Oligarchy by Scarlett Thomas. New this week from Soft Skull Press is a story collection entitled Imaginary Museums, and we have the author Nicolette Polek here with us to share all the details. Nicolette, welcome to Biblio Happy Hour.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So your debut collection, Imaginary Museums, will be available on bookshelves this week. How excited are you, and just how are you feeling?
Mostly nervous. I'm a very private person and anxious, so I've been having these daydreams of people being angry about the book, even though there's nothing to be angry about. But I'm also just looking forward to seeing it in libraries and bookstores and having people be in my world.
Absolutely. So tell us about your collection, Imaginary Museums, and what can readers expect?
Imaginary Museums is a collection of stories, very short stories. The book is divided into 4 sections. 2 focus on place. So one section is American interiors. The second is Slovak sceneries. And then the other 2 sections, miniature catastrophes and Library of Lost Things, focus more on feelings. I wrote this book over 5 years when I was feeling pretty disconnected from myself and my friends and the world and my family. So a lot of the characters experience alienation in one form or another, but also there's, at the same time, they're placed in these environments that are very filled with wonder, whether or not they're able to see it or not. So it's hopeful as well.
Okay. How did you come up with the concept for this collection, and what was your inspiration?
The concept of the collection, I think, came probably at the end, but can definitely see my whole life being an inspiration, of course, to the way I was raised. I was an only child, and my parents are immigrants from former Czechoslovakia. We lived in Ohio, and we didn't quite have a community there, so a lot of my life was in this feeling of like melancholy or disconnect. It's kind of like the weather that I've always been around, and I think being able to write it in stories made it tangible and made it something separate and kind of gave grace to that feeling.
Tell us about a favorite story of yours from the collection, or just maybe something that stands out to you or something you connect with personally.
There are a few stories that I suppose are more autobiographical than others, but some of the stories that I've grown very fond of are in the Slovak scenery section. The Seamstress is about a seamstress who decides to give up people, and something that I've thought of and have a desire for as well, but effect of that for her is that she ends up forgetting how clothes are formed or how the shape of the human body works. So there's an absurdity of what happens when we do separate or isolate. And then there's a story in that section, Thursdays at Waterhouse, which I enjoyed. It's about a clerk who decides to reinvent himself or find a way to connect with people who have better reputations than him, or for him to have a sense of identity. So he goes to a waterhouse that's much more expensive than he can afford, and finds at the end of each visit that his clothes are taken from his locker. But he still continues going back because he finds something that he desires for himself there. So there's the sadness of him losing his clothing until the end of the story, which I won't give away, but there's also just the beauty of being able to still go back and being in the bathhouse to begin with.
Right. And if you didn't write, what would you do as a creative pursuit?
I would probably be a filmmaker. I wanted to be a filmmaker at one point in high school. I've always wanted to be a writer, but there was a moment in high school that I thought that the way I wanted to tell stories. So I started working for an analog filmmaker in Cleveland named Robert Banks, and I got to spend a lot of time alone, but also just editing, doing the sound and cutting and splicing small tasks. But as I started to get more tasks, I realized how shy I was and how the idea of making a film was so terrifying, and the amounts of people that I had to be in contact with. So I went back to storytelling as a private act, writing, and in a way that was how I was able to make the films that I wanted to.
What was the last book you finished reading?
The last book, well, I have three that I usually am reading a lot at once. I just finished reading Dance by Mary Ruffle, the chapbook by Mark Widener, Salad on the Wind by that was put out through Song Cave, and then 3 Days by Thomas Bernard.
Okay. And when you're not reading or writing, what are you doing?
I am in nature. I like to walk a lot. There's a lot of good national parks in the area that I live. I play the piano. I've played piano for most of my life. I do a lot of wandering and exploring. And I'm learning how to change it at the National Cathedral. So I try to have as many hobbies.
Right. Okay. So half of this podcast is dedicated to indie bookstores and indie booksellers. Tell us some of your favorite independent bookstores.
In Cleveland, there's two really great bookstores that I love to go to, Max Beck's and Loganberry Books. And right now I live outside of DC, so they're a really great bookstore, and Potter's House and East City Books.
Okay. So wrapping up, how do you want readers to feel after reading Imaginary Museums? What are you hoping for?
I think even if a reader finishes the book with even a little bit more of a sense of wonder, I would be very happy with that. I think for someone to read the book and then be able to go out into the world and feel more sensitive to the oddness of things happening around them is something that would be great.
Absolutely. Nicolette, thank you so much for coming on the show. Everyone, Imaginary Museums will be available in bookstores on Tuesday, January 14th.
Thank you for having me.
Readers, you can connect with author Nicolette Polek on Instagram at Nicolette Polek. You can also find her on Twitter using the same handle at Nicolette Polek. You can also tune in to the rest of my chat with Nicolette in our off-the-cuff discussion over on our Patreon page, where we talk more about her writing process and the other projects she's currently working on. So head on over to patreon.com/bibliofinder and tune in to the rest of our conversation. New this week from FSG Books is Cleanness by Garth Greenwell. This is a follow-up to his beloved debut, What Belongs to You. New this week from MCD Books is Uncanny Valley, a memoir by Anna Wiener. Also new from MCD Books, Saltwater by Jessica Andrews. New this week from Henry Holt & Company is The Secret Guest by Benjamin Black. As London endures nightly German bombings, Britain's Secret Service whisked the Princesses Elizabeth and Margaret from England, seeking safety for the young royals on an old estate in Ireland. Readers, if you need a more tailored selection of books to keep on your radar, or you want to hear more from your favorite authors that we've had on the show, become a patron at patreon.com/bibliofinder. For $1 per month, you'll get our monthly top shelf recommendations of new releases that we're super excited about. You'll also hear more from your favorite authors in our off-the-cuff discussions. You'll get our full Meet the Bookseller podcast episodes, get bookish-themed Instagram templates, plus lots more. That's patreon.com/bibliofinder. I've included a link in the show notes so you can sign up there. New this week from Picador Books, The Perfect Liar by Thomas Christopher Green. Also new from Picador, Unexampled Courage, The Blinding of Sergeant Isaac Woodward and the Awakening of America by Richard Gurgle. Also new from Picador, The 3 Lives of James Madison, Genius, Partisan, President by Noah Feldman. New this week from Minotaur Books, The Hollows by Jess Montgomery. This is book 2 in the Kinship series. New this week from Tor Books, Burn the Dark by S.A. Hunt. This is book 1 in the Malus Domestica series. New in paperback from St. Martin's Griffin, When They Call You a Terrorist, a Black Lives Matter memoir by Patrice Kahn Collars. New this week from St. Martin's Press, Big Lies in a Small Town by Diane Chamberlain. New this week from Thomas Dune Books, Light Changes Everything by Nancy E. Turner. Light Changes Everything is the story of a resilient young feminist a century ahead of her time. Readers, I hope you enjoyed today's show. A list of all the books mentioned in the show will be available over at bibliohappyhour.com. To shop all the books I've mentioned in the show and to find a bookstore near you or when you're traveling, visit bibliofinder.com. If you're on Twitter or Facebook, please let us know at Biblio Happy Hour and tag us in your post over on Instagram, also at Biblio Happy Hour. If you enjoy listening to our podcast, please share Biblio Happy Hour with your favorite bookish friends, share us on social media, and please leave us a rating and review. Don't forget, Biblio Lifestyle newsletter subscribers are the first to know all the podcast happenings, get free goodies in the mail, and they can enter for a chance to win some free books. So if you're not on the list, sign up now for our free weekly delivery at bibliolifestyle.com. I've included a link in the show notes so you can sign up there. Alrighty readers, that's it for today's show. Thank you so much for listening and happy reading.